Some of you in the back to come closer. My name's Peter Goldmark, and I'm going to do my best to help us have a good conversation this evening. Those of us who are hosting this conversation are members of REIL. That's a behind-the-scenes group of people who work together informally to help find a new path for the human adventure on this planet that will allow us all, including natural things, to prosper rather than to suffer and die. Who are you? Who are our audience, our guests, our interlocutors this evening? Who are you who, by and large, are younger than we are? Let's do a quick show of hands. How many of you are active students? Overwhelming amount. Thank you. How many of you today work in the world of finance? About 10, 12. Most of the panel works in the world of finance, if you're about to. No one. How many of you might work in the world of finance someday? Our conference today has been about how the world of finance and the spiritual world can work together to find the new path forward. How many of you think, listen to this carefully, how many of you think one of the great challenges that your generation faces is, to put it brutally, how to avoid frying the planet and define and move towards a new economic system that is more sustainable and fairer? Overwhelming. And now, how many of you think my generation, the older generation, has done a stupefyingly excellent job of preparing an excellent base from which to finish that task? Great. You have a sense of humor. See where we are? One of the things I'm not going to make a big deal about it here because I'm a moderator today. But one of the things that I feel worst about, I'm 76 years old, my generation has done so poorly. One of the greatest challenges the human adventure has ever faced. We are leaving you, those of you who are listening, a lot of trouble. We're going to find more about you. We're going to go back and forth. You're a fascinating group. I talked to one student here. He's a freshman at Columbia, and he's already had experience with a startup in water treatment in China. He started up his own company. So this is a fascinating group. I'm now going to ask Aaron Bloomgart of Encourage Capital. He's now started his own firm called Climate and Forest, and he's the chair of the REIL board. He's going to give us a very short portrait of each panelist, and as each panelist knows, after the short portrait, I'm going to ask each of you to say one sentence more personally about yourself. It's not in your bio. All right. Use the microphone as you want, or you can face like me.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everybody. You're in for a real treat tonight. We've been meeting right across the hallway all day in a fascinating roundtable about this intersection between finance, faith, and the environment. So we're going to try and give a summary. You've had an incredible panel here. So let me start by first introducing Peter, or at least giving his background. So he's currently an independent consultant, but he has had a absolutely incredible career. He ran Climate and Air, the Environmental Defense Fund. Before that, he was the chairman and CEO of the International Herald Tribune. He was the budget director for the state of New York. He was the executive director of Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. And he was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation. How many lives have you lived?
My one sentence addition is, watch out, I like playing practical jokes.
Okay, next is Richard Kauffman. He's currently in the office of New York Governor Andrew Cuomo as the state's first chairman of energy and finance, or as he's been referred to, the energy czar. So you don't hear that term too much, but he leads New York State's comprehensive energy policy and has also had a distinguished career in finance. He was the CEO previously of Good Energies, a leading investor in clean energy technologies, and before that a partner at Goldman Sachs, where he chaired the global financing group, and he was vice chairman of Morgan Stanley's institutional securities business.
My fun fact is that I remember the first time that I met you, Peter, and you talked about rice.
Where were we?
talked about pay attention to rights.
I think there's a story here.
Remember that? No. And I know why I was talking about rights. On to Hilary.
Okay, Hilary Irby is Managing Director and Co-Head of Morgan Stanley's Global Sustainable Finance Group and leads Morgan Stanley Investing with Impact Initiative. She also leads strategic initiatives at Morgan Stanley's Institute for Sustainable Investing. She has experience previously in venture capital, also former Goldman Sachs, and has experience in internet consulting and the internet business.
My fun fact is I took the usual path from finance to culinary school to New York City restaurant back to finance.
Wow.
Okay, next is Jackie VanderBrug, Managing Director in Office of the CIO for Bank of America Global Wealth and Investment Management. She co-chairs the Impact Investing Council and is responsible for the Impact Investing Platform. Her background, she's written a book on gender lens investing and has experience in gender lens investing. She's got the experience in the nonprofit side and started her career actually in the U.S. Congress as a policy analyst for U.S. Congress and as a strategy consultant.
So my fun fact actually goes to that starting. I actually wrote job control language for mainframe computer terminals. Had to walk up 4 stairs to get the printout and pull off the sides of little holes that were punched to do analysis of domestic policy legislation. So this is the where you start may not be where you end up in your career story.
Great. Next up, we have Rey Ramsey. He's a managing partner at Centri Capital, which is an impact investing firm focused on affordable housing. He has been in a leadership position as the CEO or president of numerous businesses, too many to read all of them, and also a director on numerous boards, also too many. I'll just mention one, which is the Morgan Stanley Institute for Sustainability. So,
Great. I've switched jobs a few times. I think something that comes to mind as we were just sitting here, because I certainly didn't rehearse this, was we had this interesting discussion today, and one of the things I talked about was access and inclusion. And so what it reminds me of was having a discussion as a young 27-year-old lawyer living in Oregon, where I had no background, and getting asked a question by the head of economic development at that time at the state about Central Oregon, a town called Bend. You know anything about that? And I asked him at the time, I said, how many black people live there? And his sentence started with, well, there's a family that I know about. So it was a 7-county area that I was put in charge of for business development, and I learned a lot.
And finally, really our guest of honor who has come to join us from Rome is Monsignor Marcelo Sánchez Sorondo, who is the Chancellor of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences and Pontifical Academy of Social Sciences. He was born in Buenos Aires and was ordained a priest in 1968. He has been a lecturer in history and philosophy and a full professor. He was also dean of the Faculty of Philosophy. In 1998, he was appointed to his current post as Chancellor of the Pontifical Academies of Sciences by St. John Paul II. He has many awards from countries around the world, and has been also very instrumental in the encyclical Laudato Si.
I think that I was professor of history and philosophy, and I see that in the library you put very important names, and one of the names Aristotle and Plato. And I think that we need, in some sense, to come back to Aristotle, that put the economy in the politics and economy need to be guided by the ethics, by the values. And what especially the virtue of justice and the virtue of friendship. If we don't have justice, if we don't have friendship, we don't have the city, we don't have the politicarian. So I think this is very important.
We're not going to have a normal panel tonight. We're not going to ask the panelists to present for 20, 25, 30 minutes, and then when they're all done, leave you 3 minutes for question and then wrap it up. We're going to go back and forth. I'm going to ask you, the audience, to contribute questions and comments as we go along. I'm going to stop after each panelist and see what it brings to mind so that we build a thread in a conversation. I've also told the panelists that they can ask you questions if they wish. It's going to take some discipline, but I want us to think of ourselves being in one conversation because we have one massive challenge ahead of all of us. We've got to learn to talk and listen and build threads together. I'm going to tell you 4 questions I've given the panelists in advance, but I've been clear they do not need to respond to those. They can say whatever they want in their opening presentation of between 4 and 5 minutes. But again, I'm going to stop after each one for some interchange. These are the 4 questions I put forward. Does most of the financial world want to cooperate with other sectors in finding a new and sustainable path forward? Number 2, what can influence the financial world to commit seriously to such cooperation? Number 3, how can the financial world reconcile its built-in incentives to seek short-term profit with the long-term imperative to commit seriously to the search for the path forward? Number 4, in the economic model that the world has lived under for the past few hundred years, finance has underwritten the destruction and the exploitation of natural things, such as forests and wildlife. Are there ways that the world of finance now can help to preserve them? And I'm going to open, before I turn to the first panelist, who will be Rey. I'm going to ask the panelists to speak from there rather than shuffle up each time. So I'm going to start with a quote from one of the great historians of America, Richard Hofstadter. In the American political tradition, published in 1948, he said the following: although it has been said repeatedly that we need a new conception of the world to replace the ideology of self-help, free enterprise, competition, and beneficent cupidity upon which Americans have been nourished since the foundation of the Republic, no new conceptions of comparable strength have taken root, and no statesman with a great mass following has arisen to propound it. And I'm going to close at the very end with a statement from another part of America, which I will ask you to rise when I read it. It's very short, but it's very moving. And now I'm going to turn to Rey Ramsey, who is an old friend, as well as one of our panelists tonight. Rey?
Thank you, Peter. So the good news is you can just give me the mic and I can talk about whatever I want.
Yes, sir.
All right. And let's mix this up a little bit and you can be a part of this. So hearing the four questions, and I purposely, when Hilary and I were walking up, I said, now I'm going to look at them for the first time. So I did not rehearse that. I wanted to hear it and just make it fresh. And what comes to mind for me is the statement that there's no such thing as value-neutral capital. That how capital is spent, whether it's spent, how it's spent, is really a statement of values. There's values associated with that. It's never neutral. And we've made a lot of decisions in this country associated with capital, whether that's public capital or whether that's private capital. And I was giving this interview recently from someone who's doing a documentary on housing, because housing and real estate is one of the things that I'm involved with. And what we were having this interesting, he's a filmmaker, but he's doing a documentary, we were having this interesting conversation about housing policy in the United States. And I was making this point about that it wasn't neutral. There were statements made with how we spent it. So you go back to the 1940s, we were looking at what to do with the GIs when they were coming back. And so there were decisions made about that capital. But we were also deciding on the role of, because we had the baby boom, we had a boom in population. So suddenly the invention of the suburbs, and we were putting money into infrastructure, into roads, and then you had this proliferation of what we now call the suburbs. So capital was spent and there were values behind those decisions. But then there were also walls that were erected, where one part of the city was black, one part of the city was white. Where those freeways were located were not just benign decisions. Who was on which side of the railroad track? What was done on the side of the river? So again, when you start looking at how things look today, you can go back in time and look at those decisions that were made, and you're able to say, what values, or we should be asking, are associated with that? And fast forward now, there are many decisions that get made. Zoning decisions, again, that's a form of capital because it's financial capital, but it's also human capital decisions. And it really comes down to, are we, all of us, asking the right set of questions of people who are in power, whether those are financial institutions or whether it's our government, because they're all using capital. And then asking, well, what values are behind those decisions, these allocations? And I guarantee you they're not benign. And what has to happen is people, one, being willing to ask the questions, but asking the right questions and showing up in those places where those decisions get made. And this was always in my heart and in my mind, and I'll stop in a second here. I was very fortunate after I took that job that I was joking about in Oregon, and it actually went well. I don't know how or why, but I stumbled my way through that. And I had this seminal moment in my career, and when the governor of the state, Governor Goldschmidt, asked me to be the housing secretary for Oregon, and I was 29. And I took that job, and this is where the spiritual part came full circle for me, because I was raised in a Roman Catholic family, and the spiritual part was very important to me. And I, at that age, could not have felt totally worthy to have that job. And I went back to my office and I said a prayer. And my prayer was that housing in the state will never be the same. And I aligned my values with what I needed to do with overseeing those finance programs. And a lot of those decisions that I made then, as that 29-year-old, things are in place today. There's a lot that has happened because of that. And so for me, that was a defining moment. And what I share with you is the willingness to go in and ask those questions and put the notion of values behind it and make it clear that you want to understand what's behind those allocations, whether it's being allocated, when it's being allocated, and how it's being allocated. And that's how I do this.
Questions or comments for Ray? Thoughts? Yes, sir.
So how did you feel, so you said that you were kind of an outsider, so how did you feel as an outsider bringing in your values and putting them upon these people that you weren't from Oregon, so how did you feel, how did you square that?
Well, I'll never get my first, sort of the coming out party was when I took that job out in the middle of Oregon, and I frightened the then director because I was behind a curtain, literally, and they were like unveiling me to this community, and it was a Chamber of Commerce meeting, chamber with the Rotary Club, so picture what that looks like. And I was behind a curtain, and I thought I was getting way too big of a build-up, so we're going to give you the best, and blah, blah, blah. I'm just getting started, 20. So I stepped from behind there, everybody kind of looks, and it was more curiosity. It wasn't, I didn't feel there was racism, more curiosity. And I said a number of things, but what I said is I'm going to leave you with two thoughts. This is what made the difference. I said, the first thing I want you to know is that I moved here, I live here, and this is my home. And the second one is that I care. Everything else you're going to teach me. And that became the philosophy, and then literally people were coming up because they wanted to adopt me and teach me about what they were doing there. So culture is always a part of it, and what we have to have are what I call cultural translators and people who are willing to be boundary crossers. Bring a certain vertical expertise, but open yourself up to culture. And one of the interviews and one of the things I try to do when I hire people is I look into, is there cultural competency? because that's the world that we live in. A lot of times we can have subject matter competency, but no cultural competency, and then that's gonna start the erosion of the value side of it. And that's how you're able to start thinking about values and an exchange of values.
Go to the second panelist now to keep moving. Hilary?
Everybody. I'm excited to be here, and I'm surprised by the low number of people who raise their hand about potentially thinking about getting into finance. So I just want to ask that question again and see if some of you are being shy. And now that we've warmed up, we get a different kind of response. How many of you are thinking about a career in finance? A couple more. So I spend a lot of time talking with students. I get a tremendous number of inbound inquiries about what we do at Morgan Stanley from a sustainable finance perspective. I get a huge number of inquiries from existing Morgan Stanley employees who want to know if we have opportunities on our team. I think that when we talk about sustainability, we talk about finance, we talk about banking, a lot of these words are loaded, and when you bring them together, I think people start to see possibility. And I know within Morgan Stanley, a lot of the employees, actually, a step back, so I've been out there over 8 years, going on 9 years, doing this work. I joined Morgan Stanley specifically in the Global Sustainable Finance Group. In the early years, we would go talk to different parts of the firm. I report into firm management, and I work across all 3 business units: wealth management, investment management, and institutional security. And we would go, and we were really excited about ideas we had about how we could use the capital markets to have positive environmental, social impact on the world. And we would go into these conversations, and we would assume that on the other side, somebody who was going to get equally excited about what we were talking about. And a lot of times we would get a blank stare. Sometimes we would get a patronizing kind of, that's really, really important work. That's great that someone was thinking about that. But rarely do we get people in the early days who were jumping up and down to spend the extra hours in their day that they didn't already have, joining us on this journey. There were absolutely pockets, but over the last, I would say, 5 years, it's completely changed. And if I had, if we could create one job for every person who asked us about a job, I think we'd already be making a massive impact on a global scale. I think the financial world understands the role that we can play in both economic inclusion and from a climate change perspective broadly. There are absolutely people who don't. I think there are still, and it's absolutely not just the financial world, there are people who believe that the future will look like the past. And many people are steadfastly holding on to that belief. And many people don't want to think about that at all, right? Many people don't want the future to look like the past. But if you think about it from a financial perspective, the whole industry is set up to look kind of back on history to talk about the future of performance and what have you. Everyone back tests performance. But climate change and what we're seeing on the global demand, the population climbing towards 10 billion, these macro trends are going to have such a broad impact. We were talking a little bit during the roundtable today. It's hard to know what that's going to look like in 2050. So rather than look at that, many people aren't thinking about it, and many investors haven't. Ray mentioned that capital is never neutral. I think there's an interesting gap, though, in what you're saying, which is I think many investors are separated from the point of decision around the values that capital is aligned towards. So somebody somewhere is making that values-based decision. But then there's a chain of investors, ultimately the ultimate asset owner, maybe many layers removed, and may not be connected to where that values decision was made. And what I'm excited about when I think about sustainable finance is I think we're coming to a point where we're getting back to that. And in fact, we were talking about James Pierre Morgan in the early days of banking. That's what banking did. Banking built companies and helped build infrastructure and has moved more away from that. A bigger part of the financial sector has moved away from that. But I think we're coming back to some of those things. And I do think that there's an increased transparency around where those values are connecting with those dollars. And what I'm excited about is that more and more investors are thinking about those connections and recognizing that they have power through the dollars that they invest, and they can actually influence the decisions that are made that align with their values.
Please, right there, ma'am. Tell us who you are generally, so we get a sense when you get up. I don't mean
My
2
name
minutes, but
is-
like at least your name and what school you're in.
Alexandra, I work for Columbia University full-time, and I am a student in the Sustainability Management program at the Finance and Investments Bachelor's degree. You're talking a lot about basically making decisions and going to people and getting denied, especially in the older days, and people are coming to accept that. And you went on about the investors, so much circle, so many people and approvals and everything. Can you give us a concrete example of what you actually did that worked? Because, I mean, you're saying that there's a lot of talk about it, but it doesn't seem like there's really anything that came into place completely done.
Great
Yeah,
question.
great
Tell us a
question.
story of something
Yeah.
that worked. Good.
So one of the things that we thought about early on was how do we make decisions about the approach Morgan Stanley is going to take from a sustainable investing perspective that is authentic to who we are as a business. And one of the core businesses we have is wealth management. And we were starting to hear pockets of investors ask a lot of questions about the impacts their investments were having. And so going back to 2010, we laid out a plan to create a platform to help investors who are interested in making a risk-adjusted market rate financial return alongside a positive environmental and social impact. And so we decided that this was something that was going to be a growing interest. We were watching the trend lines and saw that this was going to grow. And so we had a decision. We could either go create one fund or do something that was, high charisma, an impact fund, or we could think about this across our entire wealth management business. And so we mapped out a plan to create what is now our Investing with Impact platform in wealth management, where we offer over 140 products for clients. We can offer full investment portfolios for as little as $10,000 to investors who are interested in these kinds of investments. What it has done is catalyzed discussion with a huge range of investors, from small investors to some of the largest institutions that we deal with, to think about the additional impacts their investment portfolios have. So we have portfolios for clients who are Catholic values investors who are interested in taking the quote plurality and implementing that across their entire investment portfolio. So equities, fixed income, and private market investments, but they want to have a combination of an environmental and climate change solution-oriented investment, and they also want to think about the inclusivity of that. How can they bring more people along? How can they get better energy access at the same time thinking about the carbon impacts of the portfolio? And so we've done this on a systematic basis. We've started to help educate the financial advisors on how to have these conversations with their clients in a better way. If you talk about the impact in the sustainable investing space and you went out and talked to 10 different people about it, you find that they would have at least 10 different definitions of what that means, probably more. And so we've created a process and tools to help support those discussions with clients and be able to help them invest their assets in line with their values. Is that a helpful example?
Short. Hilary referred to Laudato Si. Everybody know what that is?
Mostly every, who doesn't know? Nobody doesn't know.
To remind you, Laudato Si, a remarkable encyclical issued by Pope Francis roughly 2 years ago. Monsignor Sorondo was one of those who worked on that and has been following up on it. And that was a theme of our conversation today. And I'm going to give, again, one other word to head on. It's remarkable because it is really addressed to the world, not just to Catholics. And it deals with the whole of the human and the spiritual and the practical and the economic experience on this planet. It's called Laudato Si. Those the first two words are what is said in Latin, and those words in Latin mean, I praise thee. We'll be back in I'm a little worried about time. I'm going to go to Richard, but you can ask a question relevant to this
after Richard's done. Richard Kauffman was somebody who has excelled in two different sectors, finance and the world of public service. And not a lot of people who got the mustard in both. Richard?
Thank you, Peter. So it's great that there's been such improvement in parts of the investing world, so ESG, sustainable investing, and it's great that Hilary has had a bunch of people that want to work in her area. And as she said, it would be great if they had enough jobs for everybody. So what I want to talk about is the mainstream, because we still have lots of work to change mainstream investing. And so and Hilary also talked about this, the sort of attenuated nature of how money gets invested. So there are asset owners, and then there are asset managers. And I don't know the statistics at this point, but I'm pretty sure that the majority of money is managed by somebody else. So the asset manager is different than the asset owner. It's the asset managers that are the ones that are making the investment decisions. So if you look at Columbia, for example, Columbia is the asset owner through the endowment, but Columbia hires a bunch of people to manage their money, and those are asset managers. So if you talk to asset managers, and you say, do you believe in climate change? I'm pretty sure that they're going to say, yes, we do believe that there's climate change. I think if you ask them, do you think it's going to have an impact on markets? They're going to say, yeah, I think it's going to have a big impact on markets. Okay, so, well, what are you going to do about it? Well, they say, well, we will get out before there's a problem. Okay, because I think some would say we're in a carbon bubble. But the problem with when you're in any kind of bubble, an asset manager that's evaluated on performance, of how they do against other asset managers, can't get out without the risk of underperformance. And in fact, there are some laws in pension funds that pension funds have to be invested to get the best return. So you have to do what other people are doing. So one of the other challenges that exists is this asset management industry is not an asset liability management industry. They only manage the end investor's assets. They don't manage the end investor's liabilities. And in fact, in general, we do a poor job in our economy sort of matching the duration of assets with the duration of liabilities, and we also do a poor job evaluating the value of intangible assets and the value of intangible liabilities. So it's not just the problems of climate change and all those liabilities, we also have a hard time really evaluating the intangible assets of people's heads. So it's not like the stock market or financial assets are valued always appropriately on the positive side as well. So I'm just going to leave with one last thought, which is I think that all this is going to change. And it's not just going to change because of climate. It's going to change because we went through a very long period where financial returns were twice as much as they had been in history. And when we think about stock market returns, we think about it being, I don't know, probably most people think, you talk to people that grew up since really in the 80s. So most of the people you know that have had long careers in the financial services industry, CFOs too, they think, well, I don't know, 12-15% returns in the stock market, that seems like a reasonable return. But actually, if you look at kind of, that's twice the historic average of markets. Not exactly, it was kind of 18%. But probably we could be in a period where if returns revert to kind of mean, we're talking about equity returns that are in the mid to high single digits. That's a very different world. The whole asset management industry has been built for a world which may not exist in the future in terms of fees and everything like that. And so it means that the asset management, and it means, of course, the liabilities Also, the pension funds are expecting that they have to get 8% or more returns to satisfy their liabilities. So there's a real tension in our society away from climate change about this whole question about how money is going to be invested and how societal liabilities are going to be satisfied. And so that's the real opportunity for those of you interested in finance, because I think the whole industry is going to be restructuring. And one of the ways that where there are opportunities is that it's going to mean that there's tremendous demand for long-dated financial assets that have a yield. And so that's very good for things like renewable energy projects. And it also means, when I talked about intangibles, this world of data, which is all around you, which you guys know a hell of a lot more than I do, that it's going to help with things like greater valuation of intangible things. And it's going, both intangible assets and intangible liabilities. And it's also going to create opportunities for different kinds of projects that involve different kinds of value streams. So when you think about some kind of sustainable piece of infrastructure, well, some of that's going to have one kind of revenues and other kind of social benefit, and being able to finance that kind of asset with different kinds of parties and bringing those different kind of parties together is something that will create certain kinds of new sorts of financial assets, but with different kinds of counterparties. And all that will now be possible, I think, going forward, and will need to be possible going forward because of the changes in the asset management world.
Thoughts or comments for Richard in the back? Gentleman with the white jacket.
Hi, good evening. My name is Dazzle. I have spent some good time in the private industry, mainly as an advisor, and now a full-time student in the Master of Science in System Management program. I completely agree with the point that asset managers mainly manage assets, but they don't manage liabilities. And we have seen that issue several times with leveraging, especially in a low interest rate environment, to make those returns, but the asset manager or the advisor has never looked behind to see whether the client can manage that liability or what they are encouraging them to make those returns. And I'm linking it to Hilary's point earlier, and it's good to see that Morgan Stanley has started an institution to train their advisors. But my question is, what is the mechanism institutions are putting in place to monitor whether advisors are getting into a dialogue with their clients on a day-to-day basis? Are the KPIs and incentives of the advisors aligned to get into this discussion and speak to their clients on this kind and really make a shift in the investments going forward?
Hilary, why don't you swing at that, but Jackie, even
I was
though you
gonna let
haven't
Jackie
spoken,
take
you're
that
going to
second
give
It's a great question, and actually, so I also work in the wealth management space for Bank of America, and we did make an announcement earlier this year that we were integrating impact into our traditional goals-based process. So this point was really well made, right? The industry is in massive transition and will be. Part of that has been towards a goals-based orientation. We haven't done it all that well, but this aspect of your wealth is not about whether or not you beat the benchmark. That's how the manager may be evaluated, but your wealth has a set of goals behind it, whether it's putting your kids through college or providing for charity, or if you're a nonprofit, meeting your the expenses that you have over time, a whole set of other things, right? So what we're doing is taking impact and bringing it into that conversation in the same way that you would have a conversation about education, about retirement, about philanthropy and other pieces, and training advisors as to how to have that conversation. So it's a process.
Sounds like it's changing. Yes, ma'am.
The question then becomes, sorry, I'm an undergraduate in the Sustainable Development Program, and the question then becomes, how are you having that dialogue, the meaningful dialogue with amenities, environmental amenities, and the future generations that don't have necessarily the voice to represent themselves today in the present? That's a huge issue that kind of seems to be prevailing in the sustainable development mentality.
I'm sorry, what's an environmental amenity? Just, I don't know much.
For example, biodiversity in the rainforest would be an example of, think kind of tragedy of the commons type.
Who wants to swing at that?
I mean, how are we having the conversation with sort of the younger generation who's not current active investing client? Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, a lot of times they are at the table represented by parents or institutions, right? We have, a lot of times we'll go engage with an endowment and the endowment investment board, and they're getting questions and questions coming in from their student bodies about issues and how they're handling them and how they're thinking about it from an investment perspective. And oftentimes we will be there with them, helping them address questions, think through some of the issues, and then helping them internalize that and think about that in terms of how they're approaching investments. Similarly, in family situations, we see more and more clients bringing their children into these conversations, particularly when impact is a component of that conversation, because in the past, I think many times the children didn't really want to think about it. It wasn't currently their money. It wasn't something that they needed to think about. And so, but now this is more interesting for them, and it's a great way for them to start to learn about finance. More broadly than that, at Morgan Stanley, we have our Institute for Sustainable Investing. One of the things that we're doing there is we're focused on capacity building in a sustainable investing space, and in order to do that, we need to engage with the next generation of potential leaders in sustainable investing. And so we have a fellowship program. We're bringing them into the firm, students into the firm, to work in traditional areas of finance on a sustainable investing project. We run a sustainable investing challenge together with another school. We run it, it's open to all schools, where it's a pitch style competition where students think about asset management solutions to sustainability issues. So we're trying to think about ways to bring them in, and certainly into ideas that you have as well.
Can I just?
I'm going to suggest, if you have any suggestions in that area, really write them down and give them to these two ladies.
Can I just ask though, because I heard the question slightly differently,
Yeah.
which I heard the question as the tragedy of the commons, which is, to your point about externalities and things that are the folks that may not have voice, not just because they're not the next generation, but potentially because they don't speak. And this really gets to the encyclical and let out to say, and some of what we were talking about today in terms of our shared responsibility. I think we all believe we get what we finance, right? That we get the world we finance collectively, and that aspect of it is difficult. There is a set of conversations going on that many of our firms are involved in terms of non-diversifiable risk. In other words, if you think about those of us who are universal asset holders, you can't diversify climate risk. You can't. Because it is this, the term I learned today was the gray rhino. It's the opposite of the black swan. The black swan is the event that you can't, the gray rhino is coming directly at you, and you see it, and it's big thing to the nose. So biodiversity risk not quite as clearly seen, I think, now, but starting. The one thing I will say that does really play in Wall Street is to be able to price it. Right? Wall Street understands pricing risk, and in as much as we can start to language it in that way, which we can't always, and maybe you could have Monsignor jump in here on this question.
Maybe.
You want to comment on this? Monsignor?
Biodiversity of the encyclical Laudato Si. What is your question?
Let's wait a minute. We're going to get Jackie, and then your presentation. There was a hand over here, am I right? And on this one, the lady the lady with the scarf.
Thank you. So as you talk about these risks that Wall Street is so good at pricing and the externalities and also valuing liabilities, do you see a future where we're not talking anymore about sustainable finance or impact investment, but just finance and investment? And is that soon?
Take that one.
I'm happy to start. I'm sure you have the thoughts as well. So I separate the two. I think sustainable finance, ultimately, and some people would say I'm optimistic in thinking this, but I believe that traditional finance and sustainable finance will become finance. You're going to have to integrate that thinking into investment on a consistent basis as we look forward. I think in order to practice good finance and investment. Impact, I think, is slightly different. There's a focus on specific outcomes and solutions, and I think there's always going to need to be a fine point focus on specific issues. And I also think when you think about the kinds of capital that can come into play to address issues, it's not always the capital markets that can solve that. And so I think in the area of impact, there might be a broader set of tools that need to come into play, and so I think it's going to be a little bit different. That's what I would think.
We need to get on to the other. Hold your questions. We're going to come back to them. Jackie, take a few minutes, please. Keep moving.
Yeah. So I'm curious, on a scale of 1 to 5, put up a finger. How much do you think, 1 being not well at all and 5 being, it's an important tool, how much is finance a tool for social change? All right, you're my people. I really did come to this work through doing social change first. I was on the impact investing side, and do see this aspect of the capital markets as part of, and let's be clear, because part of what we talked about today was the capital markets in concert with policy, in concert with corporate action, in concert with nonprofits are really what we need to go through clearly this massive transformation, which is not going to be without waves to a lower carbon economy. We've been talking a bit about ESG. I just want to check ESG. How many people really confident got that? Okay, really helpful. Environmental, social, and governance factors. And this is one of the things that is revolutionizing financial analysis, and is why Hilary and I agree that this is the direction that sustainable finance will just be finance in the future. So our lead U.S. equity analyst, a woman named Savita Subramanian, has written a number of papers recently, but the one that sort of rocked my financial advisors was where she said environmental, social, and governance was the best predictor of long-term volatility of earnings, volatility of companies that she had in her 20-year history ever found. Right? So this is not like, oh, this stuff is interesting. It is material to the way she, as an equity analyst, looks at companies. So this is no longer stuff for those wearing Birkenstocks who love trees, right? This is hard data that is material to the way that we look at companies. Now, by the way, it doesn't mean that you don't look at the other aspects of valuation. My favorite analogy here is that environmental, social, and governance data is to investors what the X-ray was to medicine. When we got the X-ray, we understood how to examine someone better, but we didn't stop looking in their ears or listening to their heart or doing all the stuff that was done before. So that's ESG. The other side that Hilary mentioned, the huge movement around impact, which is to say, for the things that we want, lower recidivism, better job training, less homelessness, is there some way that we can use the capital markets and biodiversity being in this to shift that? That's more focused. Quite frankly, it's more bespoke. It takes a ton of effort. We did a social impact bond around reducing recidivism in New York City. It took about 2 years to put together a $15 million deal. This is not efficient for Wall Street. But part of the reason we do it, and part of the reason, is that our investors are saying, this matters, I want this. So if there's 2 other trends I'll throw out to you that matter to me a lot, one is data, right? So the role not just of ESG data, but of big data, of corporations being transparent about what they're doing, but also of all of the web scraping, drones, and everything else that's providing more information so that we can look at this. And this aspect of intangibles and how do you play that out. And the other is lifestyle finance. So the way that you think about your investments you being the royal you is totally changing in terms of how that is an extension of your values, of who you are. And that matters, because 15 years ago, if you said, I want to invest in an environmental way, your advisor would probably say, well, it's really hard to do, you're going to lose money, and it won't matter anyway. And at this point, you can go in and say, not just I want to invest in an environmental way, but I care about gender equality, I care about human rights, I care about LGBT rights, and your advisor should be able to answer that, and if not, you should keep asking questions and find another advisor.
I'm going to go directly to the last panelist, and then open up and go where we want. It's from the spiritual world. The first four panelists you heard are from the world of finance. I'm not saying we don't have spiritual concerns. He's from a different world. And now these worlds have met. They've met here today. They've met in the real life of the planet. And a lot of where we go from here is going to be a result of how they interact. The other thing I want to say before we give Monsignor Sorondo the microphone is that at the same time he is here with us, and partly as a result of the encyclical Laudato Si, leaders of other faiths are coming together around the same issues. And that is the
Thank you. We are the 99% of the people, said the revolution of Wall Street. So, what are the values? This is the question. We speak about values, but what are the values? The first values is, for us, the human person. The community of the human person. The development of the dignity and freedom and peace of the people. This is human person. And the other values is the common house, the planet. So the encyclica speak about this, about these values. I think this is the context also for the economy, also for the finance, also for the banks. So, what said the encyclica? The encyclica say that for the human activity to use fossil material like oil and carbon, we have the climate change, we have the global warming. If we don't change our activity, we continue to have a sort of suicide of the planet. This is very clear in this thing. And the consequence of this are for the majority, for the 99% of the population of the world. The poor people in the rich countries and the poor people of the poor countries. This is the description of the encyclica. What could be the solution? The solution could be to put in the center of the human person, the common good, to put the economy as instrument of the common good. They put the banks for the poor people and not for the rich people can after not pay. To put the finance to help the production and not to work in itself, to have money and also money, to put the tax haven at the service of common good, and not, we have the 30% of the money in the fiscal paradise. What is this? And I really, I don't know, but I heard today Jeffrey Sachs, and he said very clear, we don't have a solution. We have many little solutions, but not a big solution today. Because we don't have the real leaders of the politics that are convinced that we have these problems and we need to put very strong solutions to these problems. So this is the idea of the encyclica. And after this, we have the agreement of COP21, but today we are in a worse situation because the countries, important countries, not follow this agreement. So this is the reality. It's important that all people be awareness about this reality, especially young people, to try to move the public opinion to change the things, to change the politicians, to change the economies, to change the banks. I think that really is incredible. In my country, the banks don't give the money to the poor people that pay. No, give the money to the rich people that are sure that they don't pay. So this is the general situation. We need to really have a change, a very big change, a big solution of the big problem. So, it's interesting.
I'm going to say something that's going to surprise you a little. I once wrote a newspaper column. For several years I was doing it. And I wrote about tax haven. And it is to me astounding and wonderful that a senior member of the Vatican just casually mentions the problem of tax havens. One of the things he mentioned inside, which I will share with you, is a figure very few people know, which is there's now a new methodology available to estimate how much money is in the tax haven. And according to that estimate, it is about $30 trillion, which is roughly 3 times what it used to be. I'll let you do the math. If we simply were able to tax fairly the annual yield, interest, and dividends from that $30 trillion. Just an interesting point. Now, I want you to take a breath. We're going to open up a little bit. We're going to go a little bit out of order. Several of you had questions that we didn't get to. You can make a point. You don't have to ask a question. You can go back to something somebody else said. A panelist who's not being addressed may want to jump in. We're going to go a little bit more to free flow. And then, after about another 10 or 12 minutes, we're going to come and we're going to close with a prayer from the Iroquois Nation. Who would like to speak next? Sir.
My name is Dila Leon. I'm an international student studying at SIPA, the School of International Public Affairs. I'm studying development practice. I also have the fortune to intern at the UN, the Office of Secretary General, so I'm very familiar with the SDGs and all that. And I'm currently developing a research project on sustainable forestry, looking at finance in sustainable forestry. My question is, in relating a little bit about Laudato Si, which talks about conservation rather than mitigation. We don't have to only repair, we only have to protect our environment. But the reality through our research is that these projects of conservation are not attractive to the current financial markets, because a standing tree has not economic value, as is rather I chop it down, I make something out of it, and then I replant it as sequestering carbon. But then that has biological implications. So my question open to the financial members of the panel is, how are you addressing these challenges of conservation? How can we tap that finance that does not necessarily have a financial revenue or a traditional financial revenue? There's ecotourism. We have found some, but not at the scale that is required to protect these areas. So I would like if you could talk a little bit more about that in general.
Monsignor?
Yes. What is the importance of the trees? Because are they unique and the biodiversity, but in general all the plants, to decarbonize the environment? If we don't have the plants, the trees are more intelligent than us to decarbonize the environment. We don't know what is the formula to do the photosynthesis that is this. So it's very important to conserve the common house, to have this forest. So for this reason, the Encyclica is again to the destruction of the forest. We have today meetings about this, and this is, of course, many people, some economists say that we need to pay a tax for the people to have forests, to avoid to destroy this forest, because many times they destroy the forest because don't have another form to life. So this is very important question.
Now for the financial experts, where are the incentives going to come from?
So, you know, let's about the room here, because Aaron is probably the best suited person to speak to
Aaron, you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah. And I'll be quick since I'm not on the panel, but, you know, there has been a lot of work around RED, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. It was introduced in 2007 in Kauffman Bali, and over the last 10 years, it's been negotiated in the International Sea framework. All the technical pieces and the political pieces. So we have it. What we don't have is the demand for RED credits, right? Carbon credits that RED produces. The hope is that after the Paris Agreement, with the different carbon pricing systems that are coming into place in California, aviation, China, that eventually these systems may accept RED credits. And the whole purpose of RED is to do exactly what the question was proposing, which is to put a price on standing trees. There have been efforts, investment efforts, companies that have tried to create landscape level interventions that might include some RED crediting, selling those credits to voluntary buyers, corporations that are buying as part of their ESG commitments, but also looking at other commodities, agribusinesses, other sources of revenue streams to support sustainable management of landscape. So that's what's happening now. The hope is that, and it's far from sure, right? But the hope is that the policy will move in a direction that will start having a price for RED credits.
So I just want to talk about the timber thing just in New York State just for a second, because I'm going to go to a place that you're going to be surprised about, which is that actually in New York State, we burn a lot of fuel out of state, and there's terrible problems with the economy upstate. So actually, it would be great to convert all those fuel burning furnaces to wood pellets, because there could be sustainable forestry in the state, which create employment, reduce emissions, be a great thing. So what's the challenge? Well, the challenge is it's not economic there's not enough scale to build out that industry. So one furnace, is not going to be enough to create a whole pellet industry, a whole lumber industry. So this is an example where government can get involved and try to aggregate demand and educate people and communities to say, well, a bunch of people sign up, sort of like what happens with the solar industry. Let's have a bunch of people sign up. Doesn't cost that much public dollars. And the interesting thing is that if you actually create some more value for the waste wood, it actually brings value for the other part of the tree, because trees don't grow very rapidly in New York State. So it changes the economics for the rest of the tree. In fact, it turns it around the other way, because now there's real value to the big part of the tree that's enabled by virtue of the pellets. And so when I talk about this idea of different kinds of partnerships, you're talking, because then eventually, by the way, you're going to need a pellet factory, and how you're going to finance the pellet factory. Well, all of these things can happen, but you see it requires thinking about different value streams and different kind of combinations between community groups, government, and the financial sector.
And what I'm going to do now is get a couple of points or questions, and we're not going to take them one by one, and then see if any of the panelists want to take a shot at tying them all together. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Kevin Coley, I'm the director of the Thomas Berry Forum for Ecological Dialogue in Iona College. I'm curious about the industry that manages people's money. I'm wondering, is there a point at which advisors or managers would say to somebody who comes in and wants to invest in a fossil fuel industry, or I want to invest in a coal mine, does that person get discouraged ever by managers?
Good question. I was going to hold that. Young man here, then we'll come to you.
My name is Owen. I'm an undergrad student here at the college. I actually had a question for Richard. You mentioned briefly the carbon bubble. What are the particular financial and legislative tools here in New York State and the country in general that are being used to walk us back on that edge? And given the broader political atmosphere.
Good. Because of the time, and depending how the rest of the concerns go, I may ask you to come up and buttonhole Richard on that afterwards. Mary.
Hi, my name is Emily Boardman. I'm an MPA student at SEPA, actually Professor Dombeck's class in Ethics, Values, and Justice. And to the point of that class, I'm learning about different stakeholders and what their values are. And we're talking about these financial monoliths making these value decisions. And how do you get to the Monsignor's point of going to the people, to the community, and seeing what that value system is and translating it to your strategy?
Across the aisle, ma'am. Front row, or second.
Good evening, my name is Wayne Murphy and I'm a second year at SEPA and studying international finance and economic policy. So my question is, we've talked a little bit more, I would say more maybe on sustainable investment and also impact investment. Seeing how these two are very new within the realm of finance, can you talk a little bit in terms of how within your institution you individually measure sustainable investment? What are the indicators that you're using, whether to measure the return or even the investment itself to qualify as being sustainable?
You've had your hand up before, thank you.
Good evening, my name is Agatha Ruch. I'm a graduate student at the School of Professional Studies. I'm majoring in negotiations and conflict resolution. And I'm also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. And my question is about values and how the financial sector actually actively lobby the policymaker in the policy process. Specifically, since it was mentioned that asset management and asset owners have a different idea about liability responsibility. At this point, the industrial complex invests a lot of money. And I am here because of the idol. So that I have huge return personally on waging war of, I guess, providing horror to different parts of the world. How does the financial industry these days take responsibility versus how it used to take responsibility in lobbying the government?
Right behind you, ma'am.
I wanted to go to one of the points that Rey raised about valuation of capital assets and of non-capital assets and thinking about sustainable investing and investing overall. In addition to the ESGs that Jackie brought up, what do you see as being different tools in terms of actuarial systems or in terms of different applications of tools for valuation so as to promote sustainability goals and to be thinking about outcomes rather than outputs?
Come back up front here, we have two, lady in orange and blue.
Hi, I'm Jordan Burns. I'm a 2012 graduate of CC. I have a question actually about something Mr. Ramsey said as well. Just about what value is actually behind an investment. So you spoke a little bit about redlining and the highways that went through inner cities, and that there was a kind of a debate that took place about whether or not that was the value that was being put forth or spoken about, even if it was implicit or explicit. And that kind of mixes with, although one can have or feeling behind an investment, that's not actually what the value or the end value will be from that investment. I just wanted to know if anyone had any comments on that.
Lady in the front to your left.
Hi, my name is Audrey, grad student at SEPA, and my question is, what is the current level of engagement between the financial industry and the scientific community at large, particularly academia, in understanding the core issues of climate change?
Here's what I'm going to suggest. So a lot of these questions are quite specific. I'm going to ask them, you stay 3 or 4 minutes afterwards and ask them to come up. Anybody want to take a crack at putting together some of the more general questions?
There was one that I wanted to, because it came up in a few places, and I just wanted, one of the things is that I think none of us are here who are in the financing world are saying that things are where they need to be. That every one of these areas, there's room for it to get better. And one of the themes that I was hearing coming from you, and I've just been reflecting on it, is the stakeholder involvement. Several of you sort of asked that. And I think that's just one of those areas where we're still learning and thinking about what to do, right? So we're used to the asset owner, asset manager, that relationship, but the dialogue is getting expanded. In sort of, in my world, looking at place-based and looking at financing housing or commercial spaces, it's widening who's in the room, who's at the table, and that's where, we can have that values discussion, because they're painting a vision for where they want that to be, and we're always trying to think about how to do that better, because ultimately the product is going to get better and it's going to make the returns better. But there's more room to be done overall, is what I would say.
Monsignor.
See, I want to put also another question that is really in relation with this, and is also in the Laudato Si, and this is the new form of slaves. The new form, the extreme form of the globalization of indifference, say the Pope. And these are in the figure of forced labor, forced prostitution, traffic of organs, and the money each year to move all this is $150 million. So we see with the Pope John Paul II, that they are a structure of sin. So some organization that the end and all the media they use, the instrument to use are bad, are evil, and many times these structures not only are disaster in itself, but also have an influence in the good institutions that the human being create in the history to arrive to the happiness and the common good, the banks or other institutions. So, what is the reason that many banks clean this money? And this is a reality. And there are Italian writers, Saviano, that say the head of the cleaner of this money are not in Mexico, but are in London, at the banks of London. So we need to speak about these things. Thank you.
Here's what I propose. I'm going to read to you and ask you to rise for this thing I want to close with, which is a prayer of the Iroquois nation. It's not well known. They are part of our history. As we come together now, again, at this moment in human history, to figure out our path again, it's very interesting. Then we'll give the panel a round of applause, and then they have agreed to stay a couple of minutes, and you can come up and ask all of your specific questions. There's one of the specific questions here. Let me ask you to rise for this.
There is a law of nature. Man is not the ruler. The law applies to the four-leggeds and the wingeds. The law applies to man. Let us bring our heads together as one. So be it that way. The law applies to man. If you do not listen to the law, then there will come a time of suffering. The law will seek retribution. Let us bring our heads together as one. So be it that way. All the suffering of our mother the earth has been brought by man. The law works in twos, the sun and the moon, the day and the night, male and female, birth and death. Let us listen to the law of natural things. Let us bring our heads together as one. So be it that way.